I realized how much I was changing and how much I needed to live a life that was internally driven instead of, living inside out instead of outside in.
Welcome to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, the weekly show for nomads, work campers, RVers, and entrepreneurs looking to earn a living or build a business while enjoying the RV lifestyle. This week's host is Rose Willard. Let's settle in and enjoy the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, brought to you by RV Life.
Welcome back to the RV Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Rose Willard, and today we're headed to Mexico. That's right, my guest Karla Parra will be sharing a lot of inspiration from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. I have never been to that part of Mexico, but man, does it sound absolutely wonderful right now, as it is totally frigid here in Delaware. Karla Parra is a former corporate consultant who walked away from the traditional definition of success to create a life on her own terms. She and her husband spent 5 years traveling in an 84 square foot camper with their 2 dogs, exploring the U.S., reconnecting with her Mexican heritage, and coaching women in corporate to find more joy in their lives. In our conversation, Karla opened up about the mindset shifts that allowed her to leave behind a thriving career, what RV life taught her about simplicity and fulfillment, and the unexpected ways her journey led her back to her roots. We also dive into her latest transition, stepping away from full-time travel to embrace a slowmad lifestyle in San Miguel, where she's now writing her first book, her memoir. She shared so many nuggets of wisdom in this episode, including the importance of building a life from the inside out, rather than chasing external validations. Love that! So if you've ever questioned what success really looks like for you or wondered how to create more meaning in your entrepreneurial journey, then this episode is for you. So let's go.
Bid farewell to the stress of travel planning with RV Life Trip Wizard. This feature allows you to customize your routes, avoid potential hazards, and even discover the best campgrounds based on real user reviews. It's not just about reaching your destination, it's about enjoying the journey. And with RV Life Trip Wizard, every journey is effortless. Learn more about this game-changing feature at rvlife.com.
Hola, Karla. I'm so happy to have you on today. Bienvenida. Welcome.
Hola, Rose. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited.
Oh, me too. This must feel like such a full circle moment for you, because I know that you mentioned years ago you were listening to this podcast while dreaming about a life of freedom. And
Isn't
now
that
here you
crazy?
are,
I know.
you're living that
It's,
dream, but now sharing it,
yeah.
sharing your journey with us. How does it feel?
Oh, it feels very fulfilling to
Mm-hmm.
think back to, 5, 6 years ago. I have such clear memories of driving in my little Toyota Corolla to my corporate job that was an hour away. I was driving from Dallas to Fort Worth every day, back and forth. And all I did on my drives was listen to podcasts that painted this picture of this life that I didn't yet have,
Yeah.
that I wanted. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
exactly what the life was, but freedom was the main theme. And this was one of those podcasts. And now 5, 6 years later to be here on the show, I mean, I never would have dreamt of that opportunity. So I probably hoped I would back then, but I mean, gosh,
Right.
what an honor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people dream, but to actually take
Yeah.
action and go with what you feel is right. That's
Yeah.
special. I can't wait to get into how you went from this corporate career to a nomadic entrepreneur, and now more of a creative outlet into full-time a writer. But first, since this is the RV Entrepreneur Podcast, tell us briefly how you first got into RVing and kind of what that looks like now.
Yeah, well, it was an evolution. I mean, I can't say that I was one of those people that always dreamt of living in an RV, or knew exactly that that was their future life. It really was a series of experiments, and I'd say it all started with my 30th birthday. My husband and I were living in Dallas. That's where my corporate career was based. And I never in my life been camping, like in the true sense of camping, like a tent in the middle of the forest with no facilities, all of that. And my husband had done that. He grew up in New York. And so for my 30th birthday, I wanted to do something really different and something that challenged, where I felt challenged. And so we did that. And it was kind of a disaster because we ran out of water and it was so hot and we wouldn't camp again for 2 years. But 2 years later, there was, I guess what happened in between those 2 years was I had a lot of restlessness with my career, and my husband and I had a lot of restlessness with our lifestyle. And we just started to feel really landlocked in Dallas, right? Like to drive anywhere, it was hours.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to miss more of my life. I grew up in Mexico on a lot of different beaches, had a very outdoorsy life, even though I never went camping. And realized that I missed that. I missed being outside. And so we were like, let's try camping again. We've kind of recovered from our trauma of running out of water or almost running out of water. And so we went camping in Arizona with my husband's cousin, who happened to have a van, like an old beat up old Chevy 1980s van, and it was so windy. My husband and I were staying in a tent, and he kept inviting us to stay in his van. He's like, "You guys can have the bed. I'll sleep on the floor." And I was like, "Absolutely not. I would never sleep in a van, like van by the river kind of thing." I had these
Yeah.
notions of what van life was. And so I resisted the first night, and then the second night the wind was even worse. Got no sleep, and so I was like, "Fine." And it was the best sleep that I'd had in a while. And so that was a really pivotal moment because it opened both my husband's and my eyes to this idea that you could be out in nature and not have to suffer. You could have a real, a roof over your head. You could have some comforts. And so that kicked off this series of experiments for the next 2 years, or at least a year and a half, where we started to stay in like a tiny house. And like every anniversary that we had, we were like, okay, what are we doing for this anniversary or this birthday? And so we did the tiny house. We stayed in someone's Airstream that was parked in their garage in the middle of Dallas, like right outside their house. And just we started to learn what our limits were and what we could live with and what we couldn't live without. And so, and we started to watch a lot of YouTube videos of people that were already doing it. And so it was really a gradual evolution of learning and experimenting until we ultimately stayed in this a casita travel trailer out in Tennessee in a horse farm, and it rained the whole week, and we worked the whole week. My husband and I were working remotely, and we were like, well, if we can survive, and I don't know if you know the size of casitas, but they are small. They're like,
They're
that
small.
one in particular
Hmm.
was even smaller because it was a 1990s model. It was like less than
Wow.
like 80 square feet, two humans, two dogs. But we survived, and we were like, this is really cozy, and we have everything we need, literally within an arm's reach. And after that, we were sold. And so we made our down payment the next New Year's, which was just a few days later, and had 5 months to downsize and just did it. And I think another mindset thing that really supported us in that time was we kept talking about this idea of living a different life. We kept talking and dreaming, and in that New Year's after we stayed in the casita, we told each other, we were like, we don't want to be those people that just keep talking about their dreams and that just keep saying like, oh, one day I'm going to do this and someday.
Mhm.
We're like, we want to be the kind of people that actually do the things that they
Mhm.
talk about. And so that was when we vowed that we would go back to Dallas and give our down payment, and that was it. That kicked off the next 5 years of adventure.
That's awesome. So, okay, you've moved into this RV, but were you still in your corporate job, or is that also
Oh
the
yeah.
decision that you were like, so how did that decision go after you're in this RV? You were still working corporate?
Yep. I was still
Oh,
working
wow.
corporate. Yeah,
How
I
did you
worked
do?
for corporate for 2 more years once I was in the
Okay.
camper. And I was, I was scared and nervous, especially because my job required me to travel quite a bit. So I
Mhm.
was required, I was in consulting, and consulting requires you to be close to airports so you can travel to client sites. And so I didn't know exactly how that was going to work, but I felt like I just had this realization that I'd lived my entire adult life shaping my life around my career. And that was fine for a period of time. That was what I needed to do. But I had reached a
Hmm.
point in my, at that point, early 30s, where I felt like the order needed to change. I wanted to live my, shape my career around my life. And so my job was going to have to figure it out and help me figure it out. And so I was very honest. I did consider, and I have some friends that, don't necessarily tell their jobs that they're on the road, but I had a really wonderful team at work, and it was really important for me to not have to lie when people ask, how was your weekend? Like I wanted to be transparent and be authentic. And so but I didn't say anything until we actually moved in to the camper. So not before. And I had some really honest conversations with my leaders, and I was really pleasantly surprised that they were very supportive and helped me figure out how to work remotely, so how to work internally instead of be so
Yeah.
client focused. And that allowed me to still work on the road for the next 2 years. So I was
Okay.
very lucky in that sense that I had that support.
You
Yeah.
were, and your husband was on board so that you
He
had
was
that support.
already, yeah,
Yeah.
and he was already working from home. He had been working from home from the
Hmm.
beginning of
Hmm.
of his, career, really. So he was sitting in our little dining room while I was out working. And so he was like, I don't, why am I in this dining room? Like, let's get out there. So he also he also talked to his team and was very lucky that his leadership also supported this idea of being remote
Hmm.
and being all over the place. And yeah, but it was really important to us to be upfront and transparent about what we were doing. And we're very grateful to have that. And I think
Yeah.
people were really fascinated too. A lot of people were like, oh my gosh, I could never do that, but tell me more. Where are you this week?
Right.
So that was cool to be able to connect with people in that way.
Yeah. So I can imagine too your definition of like success in the beginning before you moved into the camper. And then as you're in the camper and then you're transitioning, we're going to talk about that. You kind of transitioned out of corporate. You made a next leap. And your definition of success was probably one thing in the beginning. And now it's probably a little different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, when I was in the thick of my corporate job, I mean, success was completely connected to my career, and
Hmm.
it was very externally driven, and especially working in management consulting, like the way that you thrive and the way that you grow is through promotions and through bonuses and increases in
Hmm.
salary and all these opportunities to be seen and known. And I really enjoyed that, and that really drove me for a long time. These external pats on the back and external accolades. But when I started to think about this RV life and later on thinking about leaving my corporate job, I realized how much I was changing and how much I needed to live a life that was internally driven instead of, living inside out instead of outside in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one of the things that really supported that transition was while I was still at corporate, I enrolled to become a coach. I wanted to have coaching skills as a leader
Hmm.
within my company. And we did a lot of introspective exercises, around your values and your definition of success. And so all of those exercises helped me to realize that exactly that I didn't want to depend on these external circumstances to be happy. I needed to create that joy
Yeah.
from within. But it wasn't overnight. I mean, it sounds like, just wave a magic wand and it happens. It really was very gradual. Like I remember when I first moved into the camper, I was still very externally driven because I was still working for my corporate job. But then when I left my corporate job and became an entrepreneur, now I was really, I no longer had somebody being like, great job, Karla, or here's a bonus for doing so well. Like it was the opposite. I now had to generate my own money and generate my own pride for my work. And I have this very vivid memory of burning out. I had started my coaching business. I was probably like maybe 2 months in. Mind you, I didn't take a break between my corporate job and starting my own business,
Oh,
which is
wow.
just a sign of how corporate driven, like how that
Type
mentality was still
A.
so
Yeah.
pervasive. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. I was like, okay, I gave my notice and turned in my computer on Friday. Monday, I hired a coach that helped me to like a more like a business coach,
Hmm.
and I was off to the races and go 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 go. Building all the foundations of a business. And I'd say it was like maybe 2 months in where I remember just sitting in front of my computer, and I felt like I had to write, I don't know, it was a newsletter post or something. And I just deflated. Like I had nothing in me to give. And I just remember I was sitting in our truck because we were living in the camper. My husband was having a call in the camper. So I would go to my truck to write. And I just started crying like from exhaustion. And the next day I had a coaching session with the coach I was working with at the time, and he asked me, he's like, how do you define success? He observed that I was still living my entrepreneurial life
Yeah.
according to my definition of success in corporate, where I felt like I wasn't making enough money. I wasn't receiving these pats on the back. I felt so deflated and empty because I wasn't getting that external validation. And that conversation just flipped the switch in my mind of like, he's absolutely right. Like I'm no longer the person I was in corporate. So why would I define my success according to that
Right.
person?
So you had to
So
redefine. Yeah.
yeah. So I
So,
spent some time working with that coach to figure out, okay, what does success mean to you now? And that's something that I do periodically, right? I think that our definitions of success change as we
mhm,
change as
for
humans.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So now what is your definition of success as an entrepreneur?
Well, now I think that when I was an entrepreneur, so I've had a couple of career changes since. So
Yeah.
I had my coaching business for 2 years, and my definition of success then was it wasn't perfectly internally driven because, of course, I still wanted to make money, and
Yeah.
have clients. And so
Hmm.
part of it was that. But I think another part of it was starting to lean more into what was the impact that I was making through
Hmm.
my job. How was I helping other women take leaps in their own careers? Now, now that I've paused that at least for now, and now I'm really focused on writing, which is my latest career pivot. Um, my definition of success really revolves around creativity and around authenticity. And
Hmm.
creativity in particular, that's something that's been very surprising to me because I never in my corporate career would have thought of myself as somebody creative. Like I would, I can't, I associated creativity with like being able to draw or paint, and I can't paint a stick figure to save my life. And so to now value creativity so much and define success according to how creative is my life? How much time and freedom
Hmm.
am I giving myself to create? And whatever way that looks like, that really has become more of my definition of success, as well as how well am I living according to my values? Creativity being one of them, and I
Yeah.
think just like your definition of success, looking at your values periodically and ensuring that your life matches them is it's a lifelong exercise.
This episode is made possible by Travelfy. Want reliable internet without the hassle? Meet Travelfy. It's portable, high-speed Wi-Fi that's ready to go wherever you are. From road trips to remote cabins. No tricky setup or permanent location required. Just plug in and you're connected. And here's the best part. No contracts, no commitments, and no reactivation fees. Pay only for the months you need. Travelfy connects to the strongest available signal among multiple major networks, so you stay online with confidence, backed by a US-based support team that knows the outdoor lifestyle. Travelfy, simplifying internet while you travel. Visit travelfy.com today. That's TRAVLFI.com. Listeners can save 15% with code RVE at checkout.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. And it's very important. Your values, keep
Mhm.
And like you said, check back on them. Okay. Are your values changing? Are they the same? Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you giving it all? So let's quick talk. I know about the career that you went into, the not the corporate career. I'm sorry, the coaching. How did you kind of set that up while you were on the road?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I had never in my life been an entrepreneur.
Right.
When I took that leap, I'd always worked for corporate, from college internships all the way through the next 12 years.
Hmm.
And so, fortunately, I knew how to coach because I had been working on my certification. And so I had that skill set. I knew that I had that part of the business down, but I didn't have the business part, right? Like, and of course, I mean, working in the business world does teach you a few things about managing your books and managing budgets, and marketing. I worked in communication, so I had a good understanding of, or a somewhat good understanding of marketing and good writing and stuff like that. But I didn't really know what you needed to set up a coaching business. You know, how do you get clients? I never had to go out and find my own clients. So I did hire I guess you could say a coach for coaches, a person that was associated with my coaching school, whose whose focus was to help new coaches get up and hit the ground running with how to market, how to go out and find clients, how to set up your website, things like that that I just had never had to do. And so that was really helpful as a starting point, just to kind of give me a list of like, these are the 5 things that you need to do. And what he also did that was very useful is he really pushed, and I was part of like a little cohort. So we all did it together, and he helped us get comfortable with getting out there and telling our story to the world and doing lives on Facebook and writing things that I never had to do in my corporate job because I never had to really like tell my story to the world. And so that was uncomfortable to just to kind of overcome your inner, you know, insecurities. But it really, I think ultimately it started to plant some important seeds that now are much more mature, now that I'm writing a book, right? Like I'm much more
Hmm.
comfortable now sharing my story, and even now as I'm talking about it, I'm realizing how important those initial seeds were in helping me get out there and be proud of my story and tell people about how I took the leap from corporate to entrepreneurial life to RV life. Um, but I think that asking for help in the beginning is perfectly reasonable, especially when you've never been in that world. Another thing that helped me was, you know, even though I did burn out 2 months later, but I did I had to treat it like a job, right? Like in order to really get this business off the ground, I set work hours, and my husband was working full time too. So
Hmm.
we just both worked, full days. And so I probably overdid it in how I structured my calendar. Like I was so rigid and, my time blocks and things like that, very much how I used to work. But it did help me to feel like I'm not just leaving my corporate job and, doing, just twiddling my thumbs. Like I left my corporate job because I am now serious about this next phase of my
Yeah.
career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as entrepreneurs, we feel like, oh, we're doing it alone. We can do this. We have to do it alone. But no, like you said, you got the coach, and we need community. We need others. Don't be afraid to ask for help. I mean, people that have been there, done that.
Yeah.
You learn a lot from them, and treat it like a business, like you said. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
that's when that'll make it happen. But
I
you
think
said you
oh,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to
Go ahead.
say one quick thing that you mentioned that I think is
Yeah.
real important is the community aspect. In
Mhm.
your corporate job, you have an automatic network, right? Like you have your
Mhm.
team and you have your colleagues.
Yeah.
And I felt very quickly in my entrepreneurial life that if I allowed it to happen, I could get very lonely. And so it was really important to be proactive about still networking, about still meeting other coaches, meeting people who had done it.
Yeah.
And so building a community, and I was doing this all remotely, all on Zoom. But that helped me feel supported and like I wasn't alone. So I think that that's a really important part of it.
Yeah. So All right. You burnt out a little bit, but were there any tips maybe you could give the listeners to help cultivate more of that joy and avoid that burnout while you're traveling and working? Do you have any quick tips?
Take breaks. Yeah.
Ah, very good.
Take breaks in
Get
between big
outside, right?
life. Yeah. But I mean, even like when you're making these big life changes, if you're
Mhm.
moving to a different job, even just moving to a camper, from an apartment or from a house, take some time to process that change. Because even if maybe externally you're like, I'm fine and I'm doing all the things that I'm supposed to be doing, there is an impact to your emotions, to your inner well-being, just navigating change. I worked in change management for many years in corporate and did a lot of work around change as well through my coaching. And change is hard for anyone, even the most adaptable, versatile people. Like change has an impact, right?
Mhm.
Our minds and our psyches are designed to want stability, and stability means safety. And so
Right.
when we go through a change of any kind, there is a little bit of, big or small, there is an impact. And so take some time to just decompress. It's something that I'm still wishing that I had done. And also to your point, like take breaks on a daily basis, right? Like I
Mhm.
tend to be someone who, if I don't purposefully remind myself, I will sit in front of the computer for 8 hours. My husband is the same way. And
Mm.
when you're out building a new business or out in nature, right? Like take advantage of that. Go out and meet people, go out and walk on the beach,
Right.
look outside the window. So take big breaks and then also take little breaks. And I'm also a huge believer in having routines, especially when you're going through change. And that may be a morning routine. I've really worked really hard on that over the past few
Mhm.
years. What is my morning routine that I will not sacrifice? And for me, that now includes exercise in some way, shape, or
Yay.
form.
Mhm.
Yeah, or journaling is something that I on and off try to do, sometimes some
Mhm.
days better than others. But what is that routine that for you gets you to start your day off on a great note and
Right.
honor that, right? I tend to sometimes sacrifice, like meditation, for example, this year is something that I want to be more
Yeah.
mindful of, and it's the first thing that I sacrifice when I'm too busy. But that
Mhm.
is often the thing that I need the most, just a little
Right.
quiet moment, 10 minutes. So what also evaluate what are you saying no to that might be exactly the thing that you need.
Right. I love that. I love how you mentioned, that morning routine. That is something that my husband and I do all the time. Like our background is in fitness and health, and it's something that has always been our top priority. But as you get older too, and like we switched kind of our entrepreneur path, you kind of forget. We don't own our gym anymore, but you don't forget. But it's ingrained in you, and you have to remind yourself, okay, get outside again, like get your exercise in. So if I get it in first thing in the morning, same with our boys, it really
Yeah,
helps your mind, your body. And then for me, always kind of taking a break and doing something with my hands too kind of helps me get out of my head. And when I come back to my work, I feel like I'm even better. So
totally. Yeah,
much
completely
benefits.
agree.
I want to connect. I want to get into kind of connecting with your roots. You were born in Mexico. You lived in America, in Texas, and during your travels, I believe that you ended up kind of trying to find your roots again and get back into Mexico, where you are right now. Actually, you're in San Miguel de Allende, correct?
San Miguel de
Yeah.
Allende. Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah.
yeah, how did that, what made you decide, what was that calling back to your roots? Why did you end up back?
Just like RV life, it was a gradual transition and it wasn't intentional. It really wasn't.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that there was always something innately bringing me back. I grew up, like you said, in Mexico, and I grew up very nomadically in Mexico. My dad worked in the port system of Mexico, and so we lived in many ports, and every year, every couple of years, we would move to a different beautiful paradise city. And then when I moved to the States. My mom's American, so it was always kind of expected that I would study and work in the United States. I built this very stationary, kind of in a box kind of life. And so I think there was always this yearning to go back to that nomadic life that I had in Mexico. In the RV life, my husband and I did little bit by little bit start to dip our toes back into Mexico. And I still have family here. I have an older brother that lives here. So there was always a, I guess, something that was pulling me back or calling me back to return. But it really was the RV that started to bring me back. So first we went to Baja. We just crossed the border a little bit. Well, actually, first I brought my husband to the Caribbean and took him around. And he's from New York, so he'd never been to Mexico until he met me. And so I wanted to show him my roots. So that was the first experience, going to Cozumel and places where I grew up. And then with a camper, I was like, oh, we heard about this amazing peninsula called Baja, which I'd never been to growing up. And so little bit by little bit, we dipped our toes, went a little bit and, into the peninsula. And then the next year spent 3 months, and then the next year spent 5 months, and so on. And so that was a really neat way to honor this new nomadic life, but also start to remember what it was like to live in Mexico. Now, the thing that I really missed living in, because we did live in Baja in our camper, we technically did live there, I missed the traditions and I missed the culture. Baja is absolutely beautiful from a natural perspective, but it's not as rich as other parts of Mexico are in terms of tradition. And so I remember, the last few Christmases being like, I miss the posadas, which is like a very traditional celebration here during the holidays. And I miss, there's a lot of religious celebrations and there's just so much color and food and I miss that feeling. And so when I was looking to turn 40, I turned 40 this past summer. My husband asked me, he's like, what do you want to do for your 40th? Do you want to go to Asia or go to South America? I felt this calling and partly probably because I was writing my memoir already. I said, I really want to go back to my roots, like meaning where the traditions are, where the culture is rich. I want to go back to Mexico City where I was born. And so we decided to do that. We stored the camper in Texas and we drove into central Mexico. And I got to see my older brother who lives here, who I actually hadn't seen in 17 years, and got to reconnect with him and meet my nephew and really reopen this part of my family and my past by spending time with him. And then we went to Mexico City for my birthday, and I have a lot of family and history there. And it was all very emotional. I mean, it was a very intense 40th birthday, but it was exactly what I wanted. And then San Miguel de Allende had called us. We actually had lived here 3 years ago, like a little bit of a 3 month stint. We'd heard it was beautiful. We were like, let's just go see it. And this was the first place in the last 5 years that called us to come back. When you're an RVer, few places, there's so much to see that you don't necessarily return to the same places. And this was a place that kept saying, this feels like home. There's a community here. It's very creative. The architecture is beautiful. It's just a very creative place. And so after Mexico City, we decided to come to San Miguel for a little bit and we just don't want to leave. So we're still here.
I think that's wonderful, connecting back to your roots, and it sounds amazing. That
it's beautiful.
It sounds so inviting and beautiful and simple, like relaxed. I don't know. I haven't been there, but
Yeah. What's
wonderful.
interesting about San Miguel in particular is that it's a place where really my two cultures really meet. There are a lot of expats, and there's a lot of tourism in the city. And then, so you have people that have moved here in search from other countries in search of this more creative life, in search of community. And then you still have these very rich Mexican traditions. And so I hadn't realized what a perfect place it was for my American and Mexican cultures to come together. So that's been a really neat part of living here.
Awesome. So you paused RV life to embrace this kind of slow mad lifestyle and you moved back. Um, Now you transition to writing your memoir. Let's talk a little bit about that as a very creative decision. You went corporate, more entrepreneur coaching, and now it's full blown memoir writing. Why did you make that decision? How did that come about?
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
I was like, what am I doing? In a great way.
Mhm.
I've always loved to write. I worked in communications my whole career in some way, shape, or form. So I was always writing in some way. Um, and I always had these ideas of novels that I wanted to write. And I would start to write, I mean, probably for the last 4 or 5 years, I would have these little notebooks of like this novel, and this is the main character, and and they always took place in Mexico. That was very important. They always took place in Mexico, and they were always about women. And a year ago, when we were in Baja traveling in the camper, I went to this writing workshop. It was free. It was in Loreto by the beach. It was very, very sweet. And the writing teacher there, who is now a mentor, she observed, she's like, Carla, you keep trying to infuse your own stories into these fictional characters. Have you ever thought about writing a memoir? I was
Yeah,
like, a memoir. I hadn't realized that some of my favorite books are actually memoirs, like Eat, Pray,
memoirs.
Love or like Wild.
I
And
like that too.
so that was, eye-opening. And I thought, a memoir, okay. And little bit, she had written her own memoir, and so I learned about her experience. And before we parted ways, she said, I think this is the year, 2024. I think this is the year when you will write your memoir. You have a wonderful story, and I think this is your year. And that really stayed with me. At the time, I was actually transitioning from my coaching. I felt like I was at a point where I either needed to keep going and grow it, or kind of like when you're in a job, you either get promoted or you move laterally, right? And I felt like I really wanted to move laterally to something different, at least temporarily. And I was exploring the possibility of opening a business with a friend of mine. And this business would have required me to move back to Texas and pause or stop the nomadic life. And it really made me pause and say, what do I really want this year that I'm turning 40? Turning 40 was like a very big, it made me question a lot of things. Um, and I said, I don't want to move back to Texas, and I still want to have freedom of mobility on my terms. And so I turned away that very exciting opportunity with her. And my husband asked me, he said, so, okay, so you're not coaching, you're not doing this business. What are you doing? Like, what do you want to, like, what do you really genuinely want to do?
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm writing, doing these things. He goes, why don't you go into writing full time? It's funny because my husband was also the one that said, why don't you leave your corporate job? Like, it sometimes takes an external person to
Yes.
almost like invite you to
Validate
give
what you're
yourself permission, right,
Yeah.
and validate what
Mhm.
you're feeling. And so
Mhm.
he's like, why don't you go all in and just really make this the year? And I thought, oh my gosh, that's so frivolous. How many people get to do that?
Right.
And but I did, and I have been loving the process. I Just like I did with my coaching business, I hired or I joined a group with teachers because there's just
Mhm.
things, when you've never done them, you need some help. And
Yeah.
so I did that over the past year, and it has been a really rewarding and really enlightening journey. And I'm now here in San Miguel, part of the team that's planning a huge writers conference that's happening in 2 weeks. So this writing world is not just now sitting and writing my memoir. I'm now involved in writing communities. I am soon going to be
Mhm.
writing as a freelance writer for a big publication about Mexico for English speakers. And so there's a lot of exciting things happening. I think that when you
Mhm.
decide to say yes to the thing that's calling you, the
Yeah.
universe has a way of opening up the right opportunities for you.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And so, how do you think your RVing experience kind of has influenced this writing?
It's been a huge influence. I think just the fact that I was able to take a leap from
Mhm.
living in an apartment to living in 84 square feet and then during that time take a leap from having a corporate job to being an entrepreneur, and then taking the leap from that to writing. I think that I have proven to myself
Yeah.
that I can take leaps and
Hmm.
find myself on the other side standing eventually.
Right.
Even if in the beginning it's a little shaky.
Yeah.
So just, I mean, that was such a huge leap to move into 84 square feet and travel.
Hmm.
And anything from then on, it's like, oh, I did that. I can I can
I
do
can
anything.
handle it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a good comparison, right? Yeah, but you're
Hmm.
right. You can handle it. I mean, you think initially that's going from the corporate to, and downsizing and all that. That is a huge leap. But like after that, you're more willing, to just
Yeah.
keep taking those little bit of risks, and you're growing as a person. And that feels so good.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's fun to try new things.
it is.
Ever wished you could learn more about RVing from the experts? With RV Life Masterclass, you can. Gain access to a wealth of knowledge through online courses and a resource library filled with insightful guides. Whether you're a novice RVer or a seasoned traveler, there's always something new to learn. Start expanding your RV knowledge today by visiting rvlife.com.
So let's
Yeah.
talk, briefly, let's talk about your memoir here. Explain a little bit about kind of the process, how it's going.
Yeah. Well, I joined a year-long memoir writing certificate program that just
Mhm.
ended in December, and that was a wonderful way to learn from some wonderful
Yeah.
teachers and learn the process. I mean, I had written in my career, but writing for corporate America and corporate communications and writing a memoir and learning how to be a true storyteller are two very different things. So I had to relearn how to write in a completely different genre for a completely
Yeah.
different audience. So that was really helpful. The other thing that really helped about this group was the accountability. It could be very easy to just be like, I don't feel like writing today. And that still happens.
Sure.
But knowing that every week I was showing up with other writers who were in the same boat with me, and I had committed to sharing my writing with them, both
Mhm.
made me accountable in terms of making progress, but also got me comfortable with getting feedback and growing as a writer and being open to being critiqued in my writing. So that was a process over the last year, really figuring out what the story is, figuring out what is the character arc, who is my audience, like what is the message that I'm trying to convey, what are the key experiences that I want to bring into the book. And then in January, this past January, I lost 4 months of my writing, which was very upsetting. I won't go
Mhm.
into all the details of how that happened, but just, save your work in many places
Mhm.
is what I can
Mhm.
share from that. Um, and so in a way, now in January, even though I'm a year in, I'm still early in the process. I'm still working with a teacher more one-on-one now. And we have this plan to accelerate and really get that first draft done in the next 6 months. But I'm also learning that you may have a timeline. Like if you're a writer, you may have a timeline, but the story has its own timeline as well. And especially if you're still living part of that story, which I feel like I am. I always said I'm living Act Three, having come back to Mexico and figuring out this next phase. Um, it's okay to give yourself some time. And I think that maybe losing that work, losing those 4 months was a way of the universe kind of rattling me a little bit and saying,
Yeah.
hey, you're not the one in control here.
Yeah.
You got to let the story flow and be open to what it is that
Right.
you need to learn through this process.
Wow. I love that. I want to talk about your Substack real quick, your email newsletter, because like you mentioned, that was one thing that stood out to me. Like we lost your 4 months of writing, and so hard to swallow, I'm sure. But you said it taught you something. And like you were just mentioning, the importance of slowing down, giving yourself permission. And in this letter, it says to hibernate. A friend gave you that advice, being winter
Yeah.
in the US. You know, Tell us more a little bit about that, because I think listeners as entrepreneurs, they could benefit from that, as it's the start of the new year. We've got these new goals and we just want to go out with gangbusters, just get it done. But elaborate a little bit on that.
I think my nature is still very much against that. Like, just I have conditioning from
Yeah.
so many years in corporate and years of like
Hmm.
go 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 and being
Yeah.
in competitive environments, that when she said that, so this friend that you mentioned, I told
Hmm.
her, I was on the phone with her, told her what happened with my book, and she said, Karla, like, you're not supposed to, it's winter, like you're not supposed to be accomplishing all these things. Like in
Right.
nature, things are slowing down right now. It's a time to rest. And I was like, absolutely not. I had been preparing for the start of this grandiose new year with all these
Right.
goals. And then I lost the 4 months of my book literally the first weekend of the year.
Mm.
And I told her, I said, I feel like I'm already behind. And it was mid-January. And she said, she was very kind, but basically was like, there's something wrong with that, with you feeling that way. And so she
Right.
talked about this idea of hibernating, and I had to sit with that a little bit because it wasn't something that came natural to me, to rest. And I'm still kind of figuring out what that looks like. Um, but she's right. We are conditioned to think that we have to have all these New Year goals, or maybe it's
Mhm.
not during New Year. Maybe it's like, okay, now it's summer, and now we have the summer goals, or it's a new month, or it's a new week. We have these markers of beginnings, and we think we always have to be producing, always doing. And maybe that is not how we're supposed to be as human beings. Maybe we are
Mhm.
supposed to go through seasons. I
Yeah.
when I when I shared this Substack article that you mentioned, somebody commented and talked about how he would write for a season, like in the fall, and then he took off the next 2 seasons to go out and play and be in nature, and he didn't write at all. And then he would come back the following season and would feel just so much more invigorated and focused and enlightened about what it was that he needed
Hmm.
to write.
Yeah.
So I think these moments of hibernation not only are times to rest, but sometimes can be exactly what we need to fuel into our work. But I'll be honest, I'm still figuring out what that is, because I still have goals, right? And I still have
Right.
milestones that I want to achieve. So I'm still
Yeah.
figuring out, even 5 years after leaving corporate, what that looks like on a daily basis, and figuring out how to create a daily routine that still honors that. I'm still working
Hmm.
on it.
Of course. I think we
Yeah.
all still wrestle with that. But like you said, just working on that, pausing, reminding ourselves rest isn't just about slowing down, like you said in the Substack, but also about regaining our strength for what's to come. So
Yeah.
that was beautiful. Mhm.
Thank you.
Let's go back to community real quick. You are you're in San Miguel. You've created some connections there. You had some RVing connections. It can be difficult for RVers to find community and their people. I know my husband and we found that after 2 years, still like we were struggling to find that community. Now I feel like it's a little easier, but you do have to seek that out and join groups. But what's your advice for RV entrepreneurs seeking to build strong, supportive communities on the road?
I think you nailed it in the sense of you do have to put yourself out there.
Hmm.
And it was actually one of the more surprising things to me of RV life was how much of a community there was out there if you were
Yeah,
willing to drive and meet up with people, and it
right.
wasn't always comfortable, because part of why we were in this RV life was because we wanted solitude and,
Hmm.
being in nature with quiet. And so when we
Yeah,
encountered some of the big social groups, it was like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, all these parties and potlucks, and but there were such wonderful opportunities to start to meet, maybe not big groups of people, but like, who are those individuals that really share your values, that you can sit with and just talk with for hours, or that you can share a coffee with. And so I think in the beginning, those groups were really important to us, just to create these personal connections. And then as the years went on, we didn't necessarily always gravitate to the big groups, but we now had these smaller groups of people, or these individuals, where we could call up and be like, oh, I see that you're in such and such place, I'm passing by, let's grab coffee.
Hmm.
So so I think that is part of it is it might be a little work, especially if you're an introvert. It might take a
Yeah.
little work in the beginning, but it will pay off in terms of you having this more long-term community. One thing that I'm learning now as a different kind of nomad, more as a slow mad, as you say,
Mhm.
is that at the end of the day, the people that you meet on the road are people. I had this idea when we paused RV life that the friends that we had on the road weren't going to be our friends anymore, that they might be like,
Mm.
oh, well, you're not in a camper anymore and you're not going to meet up with
Yeah.
us in Baja like we have the last 2 years. And and that's not true, right? Like the friends that you make, like at the end of the day, they're the true friends are friends with you because of who you are.
Yeah.
And we recently, when we were in Mexico City, some of our closest friends came to visit us. You know, they're still in their vans and doing the thing, but they
Mhm.
came to see us in Mexico City and we had an amazing time. And that was a really special moment to me, for me to realize like these people aren't just in, and again, the true friends, they're not just in my life for the RV season. The true friends are friends that I now have for life. And so
Mhm.
that I wouldn't have had I not had this RV
Yeah. I
experience.
love that.
So yeah,
I love how, yeah, I love what you said there. People are people. You're right. You're so right, because we have slowed down too. We're very part-time, and we still have so many great connections through, like, we created our own YouTube channel and blog when we were on the road. So we even still have some of those like subscribers that we're back and forth with, and they know, we've slowed down. And then like through the RV Entrepreneur, this podcast, it's been really cool just to keep in touch with people. Yeah, they're RVers, but they're people. They love
yeah,
life and they love what they do, and it's great.
yeah.
People are people. That's awesome. So, before we wrap up a little bit here, what advice would you give to some of the listeners that are dreaming of this life of freedom, but they feel hesitant to take that leap? Any practical advice or like mindset shift, sorry, that you
Yeah,
would recommend to help them get started? Like, where should they go, talk to,
yeah.
read, listen? Yeah.
The thing that really helped us to take the leap was not taking the leap right away. You know, I think that there are some people that just are like, I just need to do it. I need to rip the band-aid off and go for it.
Yeah.
We were not those kind of people because we still had jobs. We had an apartment, we had pets,
Mhm.
you know, we had all these things. And so what we did in the 2 years leading up to moving into the camper was experiment. We experimented. So
Mhm.
we would go for a weekend and stay in a camper. We would go for a weekend and camp. And little bit by little bit, we started to learn more about ourselves and more about what was important to us, what wasn't important to us too. And so I would say, you know, it's easy to just like watch YouTube videos and just like watch people do it and learn from
Mhm.
that. But there's nothing like learning through experimenting, like learning about
Mhm.
yourself. And it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that you have to go in and buy a camper tomorrow. It can be through little tiny steps that just start
Yeah.
to teach you what really matters to you. And you might learn that like, no, I can't do this full time, for example. You know, maybe I can do it on
Mhm.
the weekends. So I think that was something that was really key. I think another thing that I'm still learning now is this idea of watching yourself grow through a lens of curiosity. I think that when we moved into the camper and then when I left corporate, I was very attached to my identity as a corporate leader. My
Yeah.
identity as someone who lived in a city and had the safe, you know, brick wall house. And I had to not just change my identity in terms of how I introduce myself to people, but also how I perceive myself. Now I'm going through kind of that same process again, right? Becoming more of a slow mag, going to this writing career. But I think that now I have more curiosity about it and more of like this playfulness of like, oh, look at me, I just turned 40 and here I go again. I'm changing. And there's something really beautiful about that. And I don't have as much of an attachment to my, maybe still a little bit. I mean, it's normal, to my nomad identity. So I think as much as possible, be curious about how, as a human being, you are going through seasons, and we all are going through seasons. We all are meant to change. No human is stagnant. Because if you are, then you're not growing.
Hmm.
So that's been something fun to realize now that I have more of a curiosity about in my mindset about who I am and who I'm becoming than I
Hmm.
did in the beginning. There was a lot more attachment there to the past before.
Right. Yeah, like you said, the identity is always tied to your career, and now that that leap of faith going into something totally different in entrepreneurship, you're left feeling like, what am I doing? I'm
Yeah.
empty. Like, what can I trust this? But
Yeah. And what do people think
I
of
love it.
me?
Yes. Yes.
That was a really
Hmm.
big one. What do people think of me
Yeah.
leaving corporate? That's very
Yeah.
scary. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I was
But
like, whatever.
yeah, you got through it. This is what you want to
Yep.
do for you. That's what
Exactly.
matters. Yeah. And
Exactly.
you're,
Got to make these decisions for yourself,
mhm,
for sure.
that's right. And then, so for someone wanting to take that leap from that corporate traditional job to entrepreneurship, what advice would you give to them where they don't know where to start?
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about coaching. Coaching was really a huge part of my journey
Hmm.
because I was going through coach training. I was receiving a lot of coaching at that time,
Hmm.
and it was having that external person that was detached from my job or detached from a relationship perspective to really shine a light and put up a mirror and say, what do you really want? What is really important to you? What are your fears? What are your
Hmm.
values? I mean, knowing my values was a huge part of me making these big transitions. So
Yeah.
I would recommend working with someone. It might be a coach, it might be a therapist, it might be a mentor, it might be a really good friend, but try to have it be a friend that's not very attached to your decisions. Someone that can really be objective to ask you some of those tough questions and to really help you look within and make the time for that. I think that we get so busy. Like when I was in corporate, I didn't have time to have these introspective moments because I could barely keep my head above water with my daily job. But when I started to coach, I had to be coached to
Hmm.
graduate with my credential, right? So I was kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
So what are the things that you can do to create time for yourself to have? I love this term. I learned this from another coach. This idea of having white space. How can you create white space for yourself to
Yeah.
simply be, to not be doing, to simply listen, and sometimes not even think of anything, right? Like sometimes our best insight comes from not trying to figure things out and just allow ourselves to be quiet and rest and
Hmm.
then be able to go back to what's next with more insight and new perspectives.
Right. And
So, yeah.
that can be uncomfortable for some, just to be and listen,
Oh,
because
totally.
I feel like some just need that distraction all day long so they don't focus on themselves and what they're feeling, and maybe there's some negativity. But it really is important. So I like how you pointed that out for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you trying to avoid by not making time for that
That's
white
right.
space?
That's right. Very good.
Yeah.
And so, if you could leave our audience with one key takeaway about redefining success, what would it be?
Build a life that is truly about living from the inside out instead of the outside in, meaning really understand your values, really understand what brings you joy, really get to know yourself. Spend some time journaling, working with a coach, whatever it is, to really understand who you are. So no matter what happens on the outside, you still have that sense of contentment and satisfaction and fulfillment rather than waiting for the external world to provide that for you.
Excellent. Ah, I love it. So looking ahead here, what's next? I know you're still in the memoir phase. I don't know if you thought ahead here, but what's next? Do you feel like after your memoir? Do you see yourself returning to RV life more, or is slow mad living your new norm?
A good friend of mine who's has a van, she travels in her van, she said, As always, there's uncertainty, and that's okay. And I love that she said that because as RVers, we
Yeah.
are you have to become very comfortable with uncertainty, not knowing where you're going to sleep that night, not knowing where you're
Yeah.
going to stay a particular weekend.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the mindset that I'm applying to my life right now. This sense of, okay, I know I'm writing right now. I don't know what a year from now looks like. I don't know where I'm going to be living. I don't know if I'm going to be back in the RV, if I'm going to stay here. I really don't know. I mean, my husband and I are in the thick of figuring out, but without the sense of like we have to figure it out. It's more of like,
Yeah.
let's be comfortable in the uncertainty and
Hmm.
see what calls to us. I will share though that we are at that 5 year mark that I think happens to a lot of RVers where
Yes.
like it's that 5 year mark that led you to RV. It's that 5 year mark after RVing that leads you to maybe buy a house or maybe to buy a piece of land, like where you make these big leaps. And we're
Yeah.
kind of in that 5 year mark of like, okay, how do we want to live our life going
Hmm.
forward? So we're in the thick of that uncertainty. But for now, I'm really trying to be present for my community here in San Miguel, for the writers conference I'm helping to plan, for my book, um, and also being also open to traveling in a little bit of a different way. So like we're going to France in a month to visit my brother who lives there,
Hmm.
and maybe the slowmad life is making it a little bit easier to do more of these
Hmm.
more traditional international travel than it was with a camper. But it's every day is a journey to figure out what feels good
Yeah.
and where we
Hmm.
see our lives going.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually the exact answer I hope you would say about uncertainty, because you're right. With RVing, it's the same thing. And
Yeah.
then, you take some of that pressure off you. You're living in the moment, and that's what really truly matters. Yeah, you know kind of what you want to dive into a little bit, but you know that you are okay with just being and being in the moment and focusing on what's so important right now for you, your memoir.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So where can our listeners find you and your Substack and stay updated on your upcoming book?
Yeah. I have an Instagram account at Karla Exploradora. So like Dora Exploradora.
Right.
And I also have a Substack that's called Coloring Across Lines. And you
Mhm.
can find that on Substack/Karla Parra. And I'm also on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. My husband and I have our own traveling account as well called Aventura. So adventure in Spanish, Aventura Road. But
Mhm.
really now that I'm writing, I'm really focused a lot more on my own socials,
Mhm.
which is Karla Exploradora. So I'd love to connect on there and connect
Yeah.
with other writers, other RVers, other adventurers.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'll make sure I put those in the show notes. Thank you, Karla, for joining me today. It was really special. I had so much fun. Good luck with your memoir.
I did too, Rose. Thank you so much. This is a true full circle moment, and
Yeah.
I'm so grateful and honored to
Hmm.
be on the show. And hopefully, someone out there, maybe they're driving in their daily commute to their
Hmm.
jobs, and maybe this conversation in some way planted a little seed to help them take a leap towards whatever it is that is calling them.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you. I loved hearing Karla's perspective on redefining success, embracing simplicity, and finding joy in the journey, both on the road and in life. Her story is such a powerful reminder that fulfillment doesn't come from chasing all these external achievements and validations and checklists, but it comes from building a life from the inside out, understanding what brings you joy, what are your values. Karla's transition from full time RV life to a slow mad lifestyle in Mexico is such an inspiring example of how our journeys evolve, and I can't wait to read her memoir when it's finished. If her story resonated with you, be sure to follow along with her writing and connect with her, and you'll find all her links in these show notes. As always, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend, leave a review, and let's keep this conversation going in the RV Entrepreneur Facebook group. Until next time, keep creating a life and business that truly aligns with you. See you on the road.
This episode is made possible by Travelfy. Want reliable internet without the hassle? Meet Travelfy. It's portable, high-speed Wi-Fi that's ready to go wherever you are. From road trips to remote cabins, no tricky setup or permanent location required. Just plug in and you're connected. And here's the best part. No contracts, no commitments, and no reactivation fees. Pay only for the months you need. Travelify connects to the strongest available signal among multiple major networks, so you stay online with confidence, backed by a US-based support team that knows the outdoor lifestyle. Travelify, simplifying internet while you travel. Visit travelify.com today. That's TRAVLFI.com. Listeners can save 15% with code RVE at checkout.